no secret that the Final Fantasy franchise isn't at the heights that it once was. It isn't at the popularity that it should be for one of the most well-recognized and influential JRPG franchises ever. We all have our own criticisms, our own wants when it comes to Final Fantasy and what direction they should go for a future entry, whether that be a mainline game or a spin-off. So this time, I gave you guys a voice for this video. I asked this community about their thoughts and posed a question. If you were in charge of Final Fantasy, what is one thing that you would add to make it the best Final Fantasy it can be? I got a lot of really great responses and picked out a handful that I thought were great to discuss. So as always, do not forget to like the video and subscribe to keep up to date with anything JRPG or gaming related in the future. And with that, let's get right into it. So if you were in charge of Final Fantasy, what is one thing that you would add? Now, this first comment comes from someone you may very well know, and it is Night Sky King. Put it simply, what he would add is for the franchise to start following in the classic formula again. Final Fantasy had a specific, recognizable formula that they would have from Final Fantasy 1 all the way to Final Fantasy 9, and you could argue Final Fantasy 10 as well, but I would say Final Fantasy 10 is when they started to kind of deviate from that original formula. But all of these games had playable party members, they had world maps, they had a deep, cool, intricate progression system, they had airships, right? And I think it is this classic formula that a lot of people associate Final Fantasy with, and now that that's kind of gone away, it shows how true that really is. I honestly believe that if Final Fantasy just kept pursuing action like they are now, but they also adopted and started to build off of that classic formula like they used to, I don't think that even with the action combat, people would be as upset. These games definitely wouldn't be as divisive as they are now because you have the world map, because you have a deep and interesting progression system, because you have airships, playable party members, right? To be completely straight, that classic formula was a very significant part of Final Fantasy's identity. I'm gonna say something pretty controversial, but I do not believe that traditional turn-based or ATB is really required. You can take from so many aspects of that original formula, build on it, but still try new things. The problem Final Fantasy has now is that they're so afraid to go back and adopt that original formula, to experiment with their roots, right? The modern games lean so heavily to the extremes that they're just so different from what a lot of people know. And yes, Final Fantasy is an anthology. They should be able to experiment, try new things, especially when it comes to this franchise. I think that they're allowed to do that. But when your roots have established something for so many years, so many games, and fans have grown accustomed to that, even if your franchise is an anthology series, I think it's only fair to kind of indulge and listen to your fan base, right? You don't have to completely copy things or do what has already been done, but at least try to find that balance between, and I say this all the time, iteration and innovation. Next up, from Average Stylish Action Enjoyer, they say a charming world map should be less resource extensive than to create big, large areas or an open world to explore. And yes, I cannot stress how much I agree with this. I think one of the coolest things that JRPGs used to do all of the time, and to be fair, a lot of them still do, but it was that world map, that sense of scale and freedom that they would always give you. To me, there's just something so much more charming and valuable that comes with world maps than with to scale open worlds. The difference being that world maps give you that illusion that you're in an open world. It gives you that illusion of freedom. But the real art of them is that they make the player use their imagination. I think too many games now try to opt in for that to-scale open world, try to show everything to you, spell everything out for you, and at this point it leaves no room for imagination. I will never forget my first time playing Final Fantasy VII, coming out of Midgar and seeing that world map. I mean, yeah, it may not look like much, but to me this was everything. This was my open world, and in some ways it felt even more grand, even bigger than some open world games I had played at the time, and still feels that way today. Why? Because it made you feel like you were traveling across the land. It made you feel like you were globetrotting. It gave you that illusion, that imagination to feel like you can go anywhere you wanted. And so yeah, I think that with any future Final Fantasy, whether that be for a spin-off or, you know, a mainline game, we should absolutely see the world map return. I think that it's definitely one thing that modern Final Fantasy has kind of lost, and it's that aspect, that part of Final Fantasy, really any JRPG in general, that gives it a lot of charm. And of course, not only can you get really creative with world maps, but they're also a lot cheaper than if you were to go with a 2-scale, huge open world or open areas, especially if it was high fidelity, realistic looking graphics. When you look at Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, for example, that open world took a large chunk of the budget for that game. But say you were to replace the open world of Rebirth and the open areas of 16 and add a world map to these games, it's probably safe to say that both of these titles probably would have satisfied Square Enix, because again, world maps are just so cheap to develop in comparison, and their charm and uniqueness, it's just so fun to see them in JRPGs. Now, this next comment comes from Harpsyboard, and she says, I want turn-based because it's easier on my tendinitis than action-based. I'm old. Listen, man, I sympathize with the old heads, I do. I can understand where you're coming from. But these young hands can still get down in some Final Fantasy 16 and really any other action game. Though, carpal tunnel may be in my future. Seriously though, like I said earlier in the video, while I think that turn-based and ATB aren't really needed for Final Fantasy to continue forward, to find the success that they want, I still think that there is definitely a place where the mainline games can have traditional turn-based or ATB. Am I wrong for saying that if they do bring back traditional turn-based or ATB, that I want them to make it something we haven't seen before, to iterate on it, to make it seem familiar and fresh in the same vein? You know what recent game has done this and has seen tremendous success? Clair Obscur Expedition 33. This combat is just so special and fresh, and it's not because they copied from their inspirations or anything like that. They said, you know what, let's just take from that but make it our way, create something inspired, but something that we can call our own. And in that same way, I want Final Fantasy to be just that. Not to copy what came before, but to build on that and give us new systems, new mechanics. Add something new to the turn-based formula that hasn't been seen before. But I don't just want the same traditional turn-based combat that we've seen in too many JRPGs now. Like, if Final Fantasy is so big about trying new things and doing something different, why not do that but with turn-based? Again, I've always been of the mind that bringing back turn-based won't guarantee the success of any of these future games, and that action or turn-based, what really matters is that they retain aspects that came before from those classic games and just build on that for future games, maintain some form of consistency. But I will say, looking at it from a different perspective, bringing back turn-based now could very well work in Final Fantasy's benefit, because with all of the controversy surrounding how Final Fantasy is now this action game and it's not what we knew before. It's not this like traditional JRPG that we knew before. And with so many people within the fan base looking for that turn-based Final Fantasy, I honestly think that an announcement to a return to that classic turn-based Final Fantasy, especially in an upcoming mainline game, it would create massive buzz both on the internet and within the Final Fantasy fandom. And that alone would create so much anticipation and hype up to this new mainline turn-based game. I really think that currently that would actually happen, and it could really work in Final Fantasy's favor. Now, this comment comes from Matt TGM, and he says, deeper side quest design with more role-playing and alternative endings, similar to The Witcher 3. But my dream Final Fantasy would not be for everyone. And this is another aspect within Final Fantasy, modern Final Fantasy, that I honestly believe has not been great in quality. I mean, side quests within Final Fantasy 15, 16, and even Rebirth to a certain extent, none of them have had really outstanding side quests. There may be some side stories here and there that may stick out to you, but the side content in modern Final Fantasy especially has not really shown consistent quality. And I've noticed a pattern when it comes to JRPGs in comparison to Western RPGs, where Western RPGs JRPGs just put so much more focus on their side content, their side quests. More specifically, there's just so much more quality and consistency to them in the stories that they tell. I noticed that a lot of the time, not all the time, they have a structure, a nuance to them that JRPGs just seem to lack. With JRPGs, they seem to have an abundance of fetch questing and really meaningless side quests in general. Side quests that are there just to be there. And when it comes to the role-playing aspect, having your choices affect the story, I think recently Final Fantasy VII Rebirth has done a really good job at kind of doing that, making your choices matter to the characters and the world around you while still following a pretty set story. But besides Rebirth, the mainline games have kind of been slowly moving away from that, and I think Final Fantasy would really benefit from having your choices matter to the gameplay, right? Having your choices matter to certain characters, party members, and even just certain quests. Branching dialogue, choices, and stories definitely need to be something that comes back for the future of this franchise. We have Alex B209 who says, a large party of characters. I get making a large cast of characters is difficult because spreading story development for all of them is challenging, and in the action game format we have, even more difficult. The last FF to have a large cast was 13, and I miss that. And I absolutely agree. I mean, besides having playable party members, which should honestly be the bare minimum when it comes to what we should have in a Final Fantasy, but a large party, a large cast of characters is something we haven't seen in a brand new mainline Final Fantasy since, like Alex said, 13. But our friend Alex does make a really good point in that having a large set of characters in a party like this, like we used to have in, say, like Final Fantasy 9, Final Fantasy 10, but have them all be playable in an action game, that is extremely expensive. When you look at Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth, they couldn't make every single character playable even though they were all present because it just cost too much money, because the budget just would not allow for it in this game. Because not only do you have everything that makes up Rebirth when it comes to the open world, all of the towns and different locations all running in real time, on top of the fact that they have to make all of the characters who weren't playable in Remake, make them playable in Rebirth, add new movesets, new abilities and animations, all of that really cost a lot of money, especially for an action game that they're going for. And that's not even all of the characters within Final Fantasy VII. So just imagine if the next mainline Final Fantasy game were to go action again, have a large cast of characters, 7 to 8 within your party, and have them all playable within one action game, all having unique movesets, abilities, animations. That alone would probably cost a significant amount of the budget, and that's not even taking into account whether they come up with a new combat system or adopt what came before, like with Remake or 16. All of that is just extremely expensive, especially if you're going for an action game. But honestly, I'm not gonna lie, I would kind of love to see that, to see a brand new mainline Final Fantasy game with 7 to 8 characters, just a large party, and have it be, an action game or a hybrid like Final Fantasy VII Remake. And I hope that Square Enix finds a way to make that happen in the future. And probably the most important comment of them all comes from Gator, and he says, Blitzball. Man, I am telling you, if we don't get some type of Blitzball minigame or some type of equivalent, that ain't no Final Fantasy I want. Anyways, if you were in charge of Final Fantasy, let me know in the comments below, what is one thing that you would add to make this franchise going forward the best Final Fantasy it can be? With recent news, it looks like Final Fantasy 17 has been well within the talks amongst everybody at Square Enix. And it looks like the game has been in development and is a very high priority amongst everybody at the company. So hopefully, Final Fantasy 17 is an experience that will completely surpass our expectations. Let me know what you guys all think about this down below, and I will catch you guys in the next one.